Hello, my name is Yvonne Wilfong, and today's date is April 4th, 2019. I am at Grandview Middle School in Hickory, North Carolina, interviewing Mr. Timothy Herndon about his military experiences in Gulf War and Operation Iraq Freedom. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity.
Before we go any further, could you please spell your first name?
Sure, it's Tim, T-I-M.
Thank you. Would you tell me a little bit about your childhood, family, and where you grew up?
Sure. I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's a good ways away from here. But I left home when I was 13 years old and went to the Marine Military Academy, where I stayed through high school. And then upon graduating from high school, I went to the Naval Academy to Annapolis and graduated there as a mechanical engineer. In school, I played sports, as we talked about before. Middle school, I played football, but in high school, I boxed, and I was on the swim team.
Did you have any family members in the military?
I sure did. My dad was in the Army, and he fought in Korea. And my brother joined the Marine Corps, and that's one of the reasons why I went in the Marine Corps.
What do you remember about the 9/11? Where were you and how did you react?
In 9/11, I was in Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is where Camp Lejeune is. And my job at the time was the executive officer of the Marine Aircraft Group. Now, we didn't have a commanding officer at that time, so I was the acting commanding officer of the group. That day, I was supposed to fly in the evening. So because I was flying at night, I wasn't supposed to go in until later in the afternoon to maintain what they call crew day and crew rest. So I was at home, and I was mostly sleeping during the day and flying at night. And I had just gotten up, and I was walking in to get a cup of coffee, and I saw it on TV, the towers on fire. And that's when I found out that it occurred. Immediately called into the office and then rushed in immediately. Our group, Marine Aircraft Group, which is several squadrons of aircraft, we were put on high alert. All aircraft were put on the ground except for the military aircraft, that we were on alert in case something happens.
What inspired you to join the service, and why did you choose the Navy and Marines?
Well, I chose the Marine Corps because I think it's the best branch of the service. But as I mentioned, I went to a Marine-oriented high school. My brother was in the Marine Corps, and I wanted to serve my country. I knew I had a lot of opportunities given to me, and I wanted to pay back this country for what it's done for me and my family. So I went to the military.
What was the highest rank you held in the service?
I was a colonel.
Do you recall the day you left the service?
I sure do.
What do you remember?
Well, we had a retirement ceremony because I was in the military for 30 years. So as a colonel, 30 years, I had a retirement ceremony. And that morning, I got up and I got to fly my last time in the helicopter that I normally flew. So we took off and we flew all up and down the east coast of North Carolina. Had a great time there. Then we landed, and I moved over to the squadron that I had commanded previously. And we had a large ceremony where I was inducted out of the Marine Corps. They gave me a flag, much like the flag that you see behind me, folded up. I was presented one of those that had flown at the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, D.C. And then I was saluted out, and I left, and that was my last day in the Marine Corps.
Would you tell me about your experience in boot camp?
Well, I did not go to boot camp. There's a difference in an officer line and then the enlisted line. So I went through what was called the basic school. First off, going through the Naval Academy in Annapolis, your first year, you're they call you a plebe. And that's about a year-long boot camp that you go through. And then upon finishing that year, you go through your final 3 years at Annapolis. And then going into the Marine Corps, you go through another basically recruit type training experience, which is called the basic school, and it lasts 6 months. And that one's focused on the Marine Corps, whereas at the Naval Academy it's focused more on the Navy and being in the naval forces. So the Navy and the Marine Corps are both part of the Department of the Navy. The basic school is focused on the Marine Corps, and there you go through a lot of physical training, learn to shoot pistols, rifles, to fight hand to hand, how to apply tactics and leading platoons, companies into combat, integrating aviation with the ground units. So we learned a lot about that.
What other training or schooling did you have while in the Navy and Marine?
I went through a lot of training, a lot of schools, and that's something that's important to understand. That as you want to excel, you want to move up, that schooling, educating yourself is an important part of allowing you to be able to do that. So I went through the Naval Academy where I became a mechanical engineer. But then I went to the basic school so that I could be a Marine Corps officer. Then I went to flight school down in Pensacola, Florida, where I learned to fly regular airplanes and then helicopters. From then I went through the amphibious warfare school. That allowed me to move up in the rank and up in the Marine Corps. And that was focused on how to fight units in warfare that are larger than the platoon and company, which we'd already learned. We started learning battalions and regiments and brigades. I went to command and staff, where we even learned how to fight at the joint levels and the commander-in-chief levels. And I received a master's degree in military science from that. I went to aviation maintenance school to learn how to work on the different aircraft in different organizations. Weapons and tactics instructor's course, where I learned the specific tactics and how to employ all the aircraft to fight in a combat. So I went through a lot of education, a lot of training throughout my time in, and that's important. When I wasn't operating, I was training or educating myself.
What were you thinking and feeling during the flight to the Middle East during the first Gulf War?
During the first Gulf War? Well, I didn't fly to the first Gulf War. I was put on board a ship, and we took the ship in. We had our aircraft there, and we moved in, and we weren't there at the start of Desert Shield. We were in there for Desert Storm. So our first movement we weren't even sure if we were going to go into the country or not. We may stay on the ship, may go into the country, we weren't sure. So the first time we actually went into the country, it was in the aircraft that we were flying. So we weren't sitting there wondering what was going to happen. We were the ones that were going in prepared to engage the enemy if something came up, get our forces into Kuwait, and then up to the Iraqi border.
What were your duties and responsibilities during the Desert Shield and Desert Storm?
Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I was the intelligence officer for my squadron, HMH 362. We were a composite squadron that was part of the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. So my job was to decipher the information that we were getting about the enemy and bring it to the squadron so that we could see what they were trying to do and what we should do to counteract them. I was also a mission commander, which meant if we had a large flight of aircraft that were going in, we would lead them. I would lead all those aircraft, fly them all in to do whatever we were trying to engage with the enemy.
Did you prepare for what you faced in the Desert Shield and Desert Storm?
Yes, and the Marine Corps is, we have a motto that we're the most ready when the nation's least ready. And the Marine Corps is very, very adamant about that we constantly train and prepare. And you're constantly working and getting ready for the next war that's coming up. So when we went in there, we were ready to go. We had met all the goals that we had, and we felt very comfortable and very well qualified to do what we were doing.
Would you tell me about your role, responsibilities, and duties during the combat experience in Bosnia?
In Bosnia, again, I was based on ship. I believe that was also the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit that I was with. And my squadron, a composite squadron, was HMM 261. We were the Raging Bulls. And we had CH-46 helicopters, CH-53 helicopters, Hueys, Cobras, and Harrier jets. We were put into the Adriatic, and our job was, if we decide to go into Bosnia as a large force, we would be the ones leading that effort. We also had some additional tasks to support mechanized brigade, Army mechanized brigade that was in Macedonia. If they gotten in trouble, we were set up to go in there and help them out as well. Most of what I did, I was sent forward to the 5th Allied Tactical Air Force, and I was the liaison for them with the Marine Expeditionary Unit. And I was preparing and determining landing zones, avenues that we could bring in our forces if we need to go into Bosnia, and then integrate our aviation with the Allied Tactical Air Force's aviation. I then went in, we had a team, there was 3 of us, and we were dropped off, and we had to find our own means of transportation and get our own weapons once we got in country, and maneuver out to Bihać, which is a very hot spot in Bosnia. And we had to get out there and determine where potential landing zones for helicopters would be. So it was kind of an interesting and harrowing period.
Before leaving for Iraq during the Operation Iraq Freedom Campaign, what did you hear? What had you heard from fellow service members?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Before leaving for Iraq during the Operation Iraq Freedom Campaign, what had you heard from fellow service members?
Well, when I went to Iraqi Freedom, it was in 2007, January 2007. So we had already, the major push, the start of Iraqi Freedom had already come and gone. And we had set up Iraq already by provinces. And I was going to Anbar province. That's the province that the Marine Corps branded. When you think of a province, think of 2 or 3 states here in the United States. It's an area about that big. And our job was to stop Al-Qaeda, the bad guys that were affecting the Iraqi people, and help develop the provincial government, the Iraqis that would run that province, kind of like a state government, get the state governor in place and the houses. We were trying to set that similar type of thing up for the province in Al-Anbar. There was a lot of terrorists out there. A lot of people that may one day are your friend and the next day they're your enemy. And a lot of unknowns, a lot of suicide bombings. Before we went, there was a report that was sent out that said that Anbar province, where we were going, was unwinnable. That everything was so bad that we just ought to pull everybody out and let Anbar province go to the way of the terrorists. So when we were getting ready to go in, we were hearing it was a pretty bad position, pretty bad shape.
Could you describe how you felt knowing the decisions you made had a direct correlation to the success or failure of your Marines and others on the ground?
I feel very, very proud of what we were able to accomplish there. Taking care of our Marines, soldiers that were there, and interacting with the enemy. But even more so, it wasn't the combat side of things that I'm mostly proud of. I'm mostly proud that we were able to build the trust of the local Iraqis and help those Iraqis, the good people that were there, help bring them up and build their government. by the time we left, there was a provincial government in place, and that was from what our force did to get them together and operating properly. So it wasn't just go in and fight a war and fight a campaign, but it was to take care of people. And I think that's very important that we do that. That's probably the most important thing. And now there's always things that you wonder what I did I do it right? Did we do exactly the best? Could I have done something differently and helped other people out? And that's always going to happen in combat.
Do you remember how you felt and reacted when your base received mortar fire?
I sure do. The first time I received mortar fire, I was sitting in a small office building. It was an old Iraqi building that we had taken as our headquarters, and it was at Fallujah itself. And I was on a phone. We were having problems getting the phones to work, and we finally got through. And I was talking to some of the units that we had up in the other part of the province. They were probably about 200 miles away from us, and we'd been trying to get on the phone together. We finally did, and all of a sudden we started taking mortar rounds. And what the enemy would do is they would set these mortars up in the back of pickup trucks, and they would drive them along the outside of the base and just start lobbing mortar rounds at us. So they weren't really that accurate, but all they needed to get was one accurate one, and you were in trouble. Well, this one hit, and it shook and shut down the phones. So I wasn't in that much harm. I wasn't really in harm's way myself, but it did disconnect the phone. I need to get off the phone anyway, and we moved over to a shelter until the mortar attack stopped. But the people I were talking to, all of a sudden they heard a big explosion, and then the lines went out. So they thought we had taken a direct hit, which started a big fiasco up where they were to try and get aircraft down here to help support whatever was going on, when it wasn't as serious as what they thought.
What type of culture shock did you experience in Iraq?
It's a very different area, not just Iraq itself, but Southwest Asia in general. And that culture itself, and some of it's based on religion, faith, but not all of it. And people are surprised that there is other religions or people practicing other religions in those areas. But that whole culture, inequality amongst groups, inequality between men and women, that was very hard to get used to. There was a lot of small things. They're not. We normally wouldn't come into a room like this. This would be very foreign to them. Most of it's going into small, really run-down facilities, and just a bunch of blankets on the ground that just sat on these blankets, and everything focused around their tea. They always had a teapot going, so that you're required to drink some of this tea with them. If you didn't, it was an insult. They would have hookah pipes, and where they would be smoking some type of tobacco, but they would be smoke on. Then they'd hand a pipe to you and you and you, and everyone was expected to smoke on this thing that everyone's been smoking off of. So that was kind of strange. And they don't. They have a bias towards Western countries as well, and a lot of things they would talk about in doing. They would have one word. If I lied to another, if an Iraqi lied to another Iraqi, they described it in one manner. If you lied to someone from the United States, there's a completely different word, different way of talking about it. One, if it was another Iraqi, another Muslim, it was a very bad thing. But if it was someone from the West, it wasn't quite that bad. So that was kind of strange to see the different versions of classes of citizens.
Did you have any experiences with the Iraq civilians? If yes, could you please describe the experiences?
Yeah, I did, and I just explained some of that just now. Going into their homes, into their buildings, there was a lot different. You didn't see TVs everywhere. You'd see some radios, but they didn't have a lot of furniture. And their mindset was toward that family unit. Their versions of democracy, what they wanted was to just be able to have protection for their family and be able to go to their store or shop wherever they worked and make money so that they could take it home and take care of their family. And that's their version of democracy for most of the people there. So a little bit different than how we thought about it. I met one guy, and his name was Muhammad, and he had been taken prisoner. This was actually during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but he was taken prisoner and stuffed in a Dempsey dumpster, one of those big old dumpsters on the side of the buildings. They put one of those and they buried it in a sand dune, and they stuck him in there. And he stayed there for a couple days, and they took him out, and they said, "We just captured this hot missile system. You need to teach us how to shoot it." He said, "I don't know how." And they stuck him back in that Dempsey dumpster, and they left him there for he didn't know how long. And they finally pulled him out and said, "Teach us how to shoot that hot missile system." And he said, "Follow me, I'll show you." He had no idea how that system worked. But he was so afraid of going back into that Dempsey dumpster buried in the sand in 130-degree weather that he just started showing them different things, and he prayed that they had never actually tried to do what he was telling them to do because it wouldn't work. But then as our forces came through, he was freed, and that's when I met him. And he loved Americans. And it was great to meet him. They always want to hold your hand, though. That's kind of strange when another guy comes up and wants to hold your hand and walk around someplace. But that was normal to them.
Were you able to trust these civilians?
Some of them you can. And you don't really know which ones you can and which ones you can't. So you have to be cautious with everybody. And we had a saying, to be professional, be polite, be courteous to everybody you meet, but have a plan to get out of any situation if it happens. Meaning that we treat everyone as they're proper, they're good and helpful and trustworthy. But you never know if they are or not. So you really had to be careful with that. And some of them working like with the police forces and their soldiers, they may be going along with you, working with you, and all of a sudden they turn and start shooting our forces, their own forces. So you have to be careful.
As a senior officer during OIF, did you feel like a father figure to your enlisted men?
Yeah, that is part of it. Being a leader, and in the Marine Corps, we teach leadership from the basic level. If there's two Marines together, one of them's in charge. One of them's the leader. And we do that throughout all our training and all our work. And as the leader, as a commander, you have a responsibility to your Marines to take care of them. That doesn't necessarily mean be easy on them and let them do whatever they want to do. Sometimes taking care of them is making those tough decisions, those hard decisions. And it's tough when you send them out into harm's way. But the easiest way to look at it is that as a commander, although you're making the decisions, my Marines didn't work for me. I worked for them. It was my job to take care of them and lead them and let them do God's work for us.
What did you do during your free time in Iraq?
Slept, because I had very little free time. I would, my days were normally about 19, 20 hours long. So I would, depend upon what operations we were doing, and I was running the aviation in Anbar province. So anytime we had large-scale missions requiring aircraft, I was there to provide oversight of that or to help with the planning of it. So I would normally get up about 4 or 5 in the morning and get cleaned up, going to work. I may get lunch, may not. Usually didn't get breakfast. I'd usually try to break for dinner, and then I would stay till I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, and then I'd go to bed, and then I'd get up and do it again. So I didn't have a lot of free time there.
Could you talk about any traditions you practiced while developed?
Well, I think I mentioned that in some of the questions you asked. Our unit didn't have any specific traditions at that level, but the Marine Corps overall is a very tradition-oriented service, and one of our big traditions is the Marine Corps birthday ball, Marine Corps birthday, and that's November 10th, and every year we celebrate that. So we did take time to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday while we were there. And what I remember the most about that is when you're home, it's a big fancy ball, big fancy party, and you're dressed in your finest uniforms, and there's a big dinner and dancing, and it's really formal. Well, over there, obviously we didn't do anything like that, but there's no alcohol allowed to any of the forces in Iraq, but they brought in 2 beers for everybody. So our big tradition there was for them to celebrate the Marine Corps birthday. Everyone got in line and they gave them 2 beers, and they got to sit over at a table and drink them, and then head out. But I always thought that was kind of funny.
How did you and your fellow regard the enemy combatants?
How did we regard them? You know, it's very easy. It's very easy to marginalize an enemy, and one of the ways that that's done is talking down about an enemy, or coming up with some nickname that's not real, doesn't sound real good, that kind of is demeaning to the enemy. And we've seen that throughout a lot of our own history in other countries as well. But we didn't do that in Iraq. There was a start to do that, but it was stopped very quick. And one of the names that started to come out was most of the Iraqi forces that we were fighting were men, and they were middle-aged. So whenever we were in an area where we had to interact with the locals, the people you looked out for were the middle-aged men, because that was probably who's going to be your biggest threat, because you didn't have an army coming at you. You had people that just blended in with the rest of the people, with all the civilians. So the middle-aged men, or MAM, or MAMs, is what they started calling them. And we put a stop to that, because by calling them MAMs was kind of trying to be a demeaning name to them. And that drops your guard and makes you less prepared to take care of an enemy. You know, we can pick anyone in this room right now. If they have a pistol, they could shoot anybody else. I don't care if they're the biggest person in the room or the smallest person. I don't care if they seem tough or they seem like they're scared of everything. They can easily pick up a weapon and shoot somebody. And that's the same when you're in a situation like that. Demeaning them and acting like, well, they're not as great as us. Let's drop your guard and kind of forget that they can kill just as well as we can.
What do you remember most about returning home from your deployments?
I remember being extremely tired. I had lost a lot of weight, but probably the biggest thing is you get so ingrained. As I mentioned, you're constantly working towards the mission, and there are periods that you're awake 48, 72 hours in the fight, combating the enemy. That you get so ingrained to what you have to do and tracking everything and making sure things are right, that before I left, I turned everything over to the incoming air officer. He took over my job, but I couldn't let go. Every waking moment, I kept wondering what was going on. Did they prepare for the medevacs? Do they have the aircraft overhead in case there's a troops in contact situation? I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't let myself get away from it because you're doing it for so long. 13 months continuous like that. It took a long time to try and break from it. And then I always had a rough time because everywhere I'd go, once I got back home, I kept looking for my weapons. Oh no, I left my weapons someplace. I don't have my M4 with me. I don't have my 9mm with me. Of course, we're not carrying them back here, but everywhere you went in Iraq, you carried those weapons. So it took me a long time to get used to not carrying a weapon.
Do you have any favorite stories or experiences you would like to share with us today?
In regards to Iraq, two of my favorite stories. One isn't real exciting, but it's one that I'm most proud of, is when we brought in a newly elected provincial government for Anbar province, and we brought in all the Iraqis and all the sheiks, because in Iraq, it's not just the government leaders in the areas, but they have tribes out there, and there's a sheik in charge of each tribe, and they have a pecking order of who's the most important sheik on down. And if you want to get anything done, it can't just be the governance, but it has to be these sheiks as well that agree to do anything. And we were able to finally show them how to put together a government, and then I was real proud when we actually had them take over first meeting and actually do the governance that they were supposed to do. So that was a very good experience. Two more experiences, more combat related. There was a lot of fuel pipelines in the area, and we ended up having to transport fuel, gasoline and oil, from one area to the next. And we would get these convoys of a bunch of fuel trucks, and we would have our armored Humvees and our MRAPs, as they call them, another vehicle. And we'd have helicopters overhead protecting, and we had all our Marines supporting these convoys, and we'd move them across the country from one province to the next. And every time, as we'd be going, we would hit an intersection of road, and one of these trucks, one of the drivers, would turn the other direction and take off down this road to try and steal this truck full of fuel. Well, we had armored vehicles right along with them. We had helicopters overhead. There's no way for them to go, but they would still always take off and try and get away with this truck full of fuel. And we'd eventually stop them and bring them back in and arrest the guy. But I thought that was kind of interesting for them. And then another item that always rings with me was an incident where we supported the Army. And normally when the Army units use the Air Force for their aviation coverage. Well, the Marine Corps, we have our infantry, we have our own aviation, our own jets and helicopters, so we provide our own. Well, one of these Army units was having trouble with some of the insurgents, some of the Al-Qaeda that were attacking, and then they would go into this large field, about twice the size of a football field. And it had this long, tall grass. And it was real thick, and they could actually dig tunnels through this grass. Well, there's nothing to do. They couldn't get to them. The Army kept didn't want to go in there after them because that's pretty dangerous. So they would get the Air Force to try and to bomb that area. And the bombs would have no effect because this was so thick. They couldn't get down to the areas that they needed. So we had, the Marine Corps, we had some bombs. They were F-77 fire bombs. And I was just talking to one of the Army officers, and he said, we wish we had something that could burn all this up so we could get to these bad guys. I said, well, we have something. And we'd be more than willing to help you. But that was a long, difficult process to get the Army and the Air Force to agree to let the Marine Corps go over there and take care of this. So it was something that was very out of the norm on how the different commands and the different services work together. We were able to bypass that, use our aircraft in coordination with the Air Force to support the Army. And we brought them in, and we ended up bringing in 4 F-18s and 4 Harriers, all carrying as many of these F-77 bombs as they could, and they dropped them in that area, and it was a light show. And it lit the whole place up, but it burned all that down, and they were able to take care of the problem.
What advice would you give to anyone thinking about serving in the military?
I would say that if you have any desire to do it, that you should pursue it. No one has a right to serve in the military, but they have a right to pursue that. And the military picks those that are able to do what needs to be done. And I think it's important that we look out for each other. You know, that's what makes it special, and that's something that's special here in the United States. And we're given a lot, and we're given a lot from other people that were willing to stand up for us and say, no, not on my watch, you're not going to do that. And so a lot of things you get to do, to be here in this school, to be able to learn, and to be able to pursue high school and then go to college if you'd like, or to have the job that you want, to go to the church that you want to go to. A lot of those rights aren't just for naught. They weren't just given to you. They had to be protected and defended, and it took our military to do that. So I think because I got those rights, we have those rights, that we ought to give back and help others as well. So I'm helping so that you guys can have those rights. And then when people your age get to be old enough to serve in the military, I think they should consider it, to take care of this country, to help out this country and others. I think you can also leverage that for education and help yourself out. Have the military help you go to college. And then you can get a college degree and you can help yourself even better. So kind of, you help them out and they help you out. So I think it's tremendous.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate y'all taking the time and putting this into making something special for us. So.
Thank you for coming.